Welcome everyone. I appreciate you guys tuning in. I have Coach Vesna Antwan. I believe I'm pronouncing that right. I hope so. Correct me if I'm wrong. Joining us today. Vesna, how are you doing today?
Good. How are you, Patrick?
I'm doing very, very well and excited to have you here today to pick your brain and get some insight. So thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're welcome. How have you been? How's your weekend? We're on a Monday today, but how's your day?
Things are good. It was a bit of a marathon to get to the end of the school year.
Right.
But now is officially summer break. The sun is shining here in Montreal where I live.
Yes.
And it's starting to really feel like summer, which is nice. I think, it's safe to say that we could all use just a collective break.
Yes, I agree.
Yeah.
It's been an interesting year, and we'll ask some questions around COVID, but how has that kind of affected your life in the last year or so, even this year, the last 6 months?
I think like for a lot of people, it's been really good and also really bad. There's been definitely like holding a lot of complexity in terms of, living with a lot of just stress, the stress of not knowing what was happening, the stress of dealing with losses of loved ones, losses of income in a lot of people's cases. It's just a lot of uncertainty. I don't think that as humans, we're kind of hardwired to live with just that kind of intense level of uncertainty over such a long period of time. And, in coaching, we often talk about yes. And in my case, it's been a really kind of wonderful year in terms of just getting more visibility, in terms of my practice growing, in terms of people seeking out my services because suddenly they were in this period of reflection, in this period of wondering, what am I doing with my life? Where do I see myself going? What kind of impact do I want to be having? How do I navigate the stresses of living in these pandemic times? And I think I can speak for myself and other people who are in the kind of therapeutic / coaching / healing professions. There's definitely been a need for our kind of services at this time. I would say that the majority of my clients are definitely in that headspace of kind of wondering what's next and what do they want? Do they want to go back to an office? Do they like working from home? Like how has COVID shifted their kind of understanding of themselves and their values and what it is that they see themselves doing kind of moving forward? I think the world has changed on so many different levels. And I think there's definitely a feeling on behalf of a lot of people of not wanting to necessarily go back to the way things were, because I think that the way that things were felt very unsustainable, felt stressful, felt like we never had enough time to kind of rest and recover and just catch our breath. So I think a lot of people liked having just more time, more quiet, more of an ability to kind of think and reflect, even though that can often be very scary at times too, and overwhelming. I think a lot of us aren't used to that, to suddenly be like, oh, I don't have distractions. I can't just go out to the bar, or I can't just go see a movie, or I can't just like go see a friend. It's like, oh, I have to kind of sit with myself right now. And I think in this cycle of always being busy, of always being stressed, of always working a lot, it kind of distracts us from who we are. And I think if the pandemic has taught me anything, is like, we have to kind of return to ourselves, which kind of forms the basis of my coaching practice. It's not about necessarily changing who you are, but it's about reconnecting to who you are.
Okay. No, thank you. Appreciate that. So why don't we do this? And I want to get into, the transitioning, the change, the uncertainty that people are facing, the stress, and how to overcome and deal with it and accept it, and the emotions that arise and that have arisen during this period. But maybe we can start off just letting people know who you are, maybe a bit of your background and what kind of got you into coaching before we get into the questions.
Yeah, so my name is Vesna Antwan. I am a certified personal and professional coach. In my coaching practice, I like to work with professionals who are burnt out by life, burnt out by their careers, and like I mentioned earlier, are really looking to not necessarily kind of change who they are, but who are looking to kind of return to the core essence of who they are, to reconnect to their values, to reconnect to the things. I like to say this all the time, like, what are the things that make your heart sing? I myself hired a coach many, many years ago when I was in a career transition myself. And it was through working with that coach, shout out to my first coach, Minnie Richardson, who supported me at that time. And yeah, really kind of opened my eyes to other possibilities, to kind of other ways of being. And it was through that work with that coach that I thought to myself, you know what, this is something that I think that I could potentially do. I grew up in an environment, my mom's a social worker, my dad's an English teacher. I grew up in an environment of social justice. I think it's always been kind of ingrained in me to kind of want to be of service and to want to help others. And at the time I was, working in the field of post-secondary education, but I was really looking to kind of add to my learning and do something else. So I decided to go back to school to get a coaching certificate. And at the time I, finished my program, and I really had this fire in my belly of like, yeah, I'm going to, work for myself and be an entrepreneur and do all these things that I had zero experience doing. And then I would say like less than a year after graduating from that coaching program, I found out I was pregnant with my now son, who's almost 9. And at the time, it just felt easier to kind of go back to my day job.
Okay.
So I went back to my day job. But there was still this kind of fire. There was like this whisper in my heart sort of saying, what it is that you want is not to like necessarily be working in an office anymore. You want to kind of work for yourself. You want to branch out on your own. But I had all these fears that were really holding me back. I say this all the time, like this sort of child of immigrant parents piece, this idea that you have to kind of just work hard and power through, and you can't allow yourself these kind of fantasies of, oh, what would make me happy? It's like, no, you have a stable job, like you're doing something, you have an income, you have value, you have worth. And yeah, it took my own kind of big burnout to kind of realize, what, like life is short. I need to kind of like do the thing that I've been talking about wanting to do and follow that whisper in my heart. And I have to kind of pause and acknowledge the fact that I was really privileged. I was in a partnership with someone who said, take all the time that you want. I want you to feel better. I want you to feel good. I want you to do something that makes you happy and that fulfills you. And yeah, so basically I ended up taking an entire year off to kind of just recover from my own burnout. And it was at the end of that year that I started my coaching practice. And I haven't looked back since. I sort of have gone from like waking up every morning with this feeling of dread about work to like having more of a spring in my step, feeling like I have time to do the things that I want to do. I can do work that feels more like a vocation as opposed to a career, which I think if you can do work that you love with people that you love. I heard Conan O'Brien say this recently on his show, on his final episode. He said, that is the greatest blessing of all. That is the greatest gift of all. And to be able to do that. And I sort of like transformed my life at the age of 45. This was like a slow train. It wasn't something that I did when I was like young and inexperienced. It was really the product of a lot of years of kind of falling down, getting back up, and just finally like having the courage and the bravery, and having sort of the wind knocked out of my sails in a pretty significant way to kind of allow me to kind of move forward and do that thing that I was being called to do.
Absolutely love that.
Yeah.
Love that story. That's great.
And I think, sorry to interrupt you, but I think, often sometimes I look back and I think, darn it, like I wish I hadn't waited so long. But then I think to myself and I think, a lot of people have that whisper in their hearts and they never follow it at all. So it's never too late. I think if whoever's watching, what I want them to kind of take away from my story is that it's never too late to start. And it's okay to start when you don't feel ready either.
Yeah. Absolutely. And I thank you for sharing that, Vesna. And I think like right now, is an ideal time. Like I think with the shift and the uncertainty of COVID being here and landing in your lap, it's forced people to reflect. It's forced people to work remotely. It's forced people to kind of gain a new skill set, adjust to their home environment and whatnot. But this change is definitely something that everyone is facing. And, you know, with it, I've heard a lot of people feel like, you know, I have anxiety around this change. It's kind of forced upon me. It's here outside of my control, and they're not sure how to transition. And if you could give people advice as to how to face this change and uncertainty with positivity rather than step forward rather than some negativity and kind of stepping back and being small, what would you say for people to try to adjust to that?
Absolutely. You know, I'm really influenced by the work of Martin Seligman and his work around positive psychology. And he talks about something called PERMA, which is PERMA. And I've added an H to the end of that. So PERMA H. So P being like, you know, these are the 6 things or 7 things that need to be in place to feel as though you're really thriving in life. You know, so I would say the first thing is like P, positive emotions. Like, what are the positive emotions that you love to feel?
Right.
And what are the activities that facilitate these emotions? I'm a huge proponent of like small daily intentional practices that like bring us joy and nourishment. You know, so does it have to be, I have to like run 10K at lunch? It could be something as simple as I'm having an impromptu dance party in my kitchen with my kids, or hey, I'm taking a couple of minutes to write in my journal, or hey, I decided to take a walk and I decided to just like really pay attention to like the trees and the butterflies and the flowers around me, right? So just like a little mindfulness piece. So like, what are the positive emotions that you love to feel, and what activities really make you feel good? And like do more of those things, even if it's just for a couple of minutes at a time. That'll make a big difference in the long term. And then I would say E, like engagement. So like, what activities make you feel as though you're like in the zone? Like, what makes you feel as though you lose track of time? What's something that you love to do where suddenly you look at your watch and you're like, holy crap, like it's been an hour and I've just been so focused on this thing that just brings me so much satisfaction. R, like relationships. Like, who are your people? Who are the people that you want to spend time with? Who are the people that like uplift you and bring you joy and kind of like hold space for you when you're struggling, and who also like really cheerlead for you and support you in every aspect of your life, right? And then I would say M, meaning. So what types of activities contribute to your sense of meaning and purpose? A, achievement, like what kind of things drive you? What does achievement mean for you? What does that look like for you? And the last thing I would say is health, right? So sometimes we think of our health in like a very narrow way, but I encourage my coaching clients to think about their health in a really 360-degree way. And I also ask my clients, like, how do you recover? Like, how do you recover throughout the day, after work, on the weekends? Are you able to actually take a break and do nothing? Or do the feelings of guilt kind of immediately kick in and you have to sort of like busy yourself? I think in the world of wellness and in the world of coaching, there's this sense that we have to kind of always be moving forward and always be crushing goals and always kind of live our best lives. Say the world of coaching is so full of messaging around always momentum and moving forward and crushing goals. And I like to kind of push back, especially as someone who identifies as a racialized woman. I like to say, hey, it's okay to slow down. It's okay to take a break. It's okay to kind of do nothing, especially as women, especially as racialized women. And I like to kind of challenge my clients when they have limiting beliefs, like, oh, I felt lazy. I didn't do anything. I just took a break. It's like, no, it's okay. In fact, you don't have to earn that. That is your right. That is what you need to be doing for yourself.
And is that what you would say? Thank you for sharing that. I mean, is that what you would say when people have limited beliefs or when they start to self-sabotage? Would you tell them like it's okay to take a step back and it's okay to like not to aim to be perfect, but more of the progression along the way?
Yeah, totally. You know, like this idea of like passion over perfection, right? Or sometimes good enough is good enough. I often talk to my clients too about like something I call 80-20. Like what can go into the 20% bucket and what can go in the 80% bucket, knowing that most things you can do at 20%. You know what I mean? So like when a client is kind of ruminating and spinning and sort of wondering, like I say, hey, is this 80% or 20%?
Right.
And most of the time it's 20%. You know, I think as people who are, I also have that tendency towards wanting to be perfect all the time.
Of course.
And sometimes I've in the past kind of talked myself out of really wonderful and meaningful experiences because I was so stuck in this idea of perfection. And I really like what Brené Brown says about, you know, just learning to become like a recovering perfectionist, right?
Yes.
I think I'm working on that of just, you know what, it's okay. It's okay to kind of fail and stumble and not get things right. And in fact, those are the moments that teach us the most in life.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You mentioned something, and I was looking at it, one of your podcasts that you presented, and it was talking about leaning into your emotions, right?
Yes.
Leading with your emotions and not ignoring them so much, because obviously it's harmful to ignore the emotions. They're almost like a GPS that's telling us where we should be going, what we should be doing. You know, and I mentioned that to someone as well. And it was interesting because their response, it was a male friend of mine. And sometimes as men, we fall into this box of, you know, don't listen to your emotions, you know, lead with head up, ignore your emotions and suppress them because they get you into trouble. Those are not things we should be listening to. And, you know, I couldn't articulate what you said as well as you did, but what advice would you give for people? Because sometimes they feel as though if I lead with my emotions, it's going to get me into trouble. So I need to process it, reflect, strategize, and think through. What would your response be to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's absolutely okay to take a moment to kind of think through and to strategize, and to be in a space where you are responding rather than reacting.
Yes.
One of the things that I'm learning as someone who is deeply emotional, deeply empathetic, I sort of feel everything all the time, you know, which can be exhausting in its own way, you know?
Right.
Which is why I've sort of like had to build a life for myself where I have a lot of alone time, where I have time to kind of just like process and think and write and just be with myself.
Yes.
I think, you know, we have this idea, like, and which comes from maybe white supremacy, which maybe comes from the patriarchy, which maybe comes from, you know, insert your broken system here. This idea that we place value on intellect. We place value on the written word. We place value on research and data, you know, like show me the proof.
Well said.
And I think more and more, and this is what I'm kind of hoping for, I'm hoping that we will transition more to a place where we allow room for feelings. We allow room for stories. We allow room for people just kind of showing up authentically and not having to kind of feel the need to kind of put on a mask.
Yes.
Because suddenly I'm at work or I'm at the office or I need to have a conversation with my boss. You know, I think you mentioned the, like being a man and how often men have been taught to not be expressive.
Right.
I think women have also been taught the same thing, especially in the context of work, you know, like don't show your emotions, don't, you know, just kind of keep your head down and do the work. And I think I'm hoping that we're shifting away from that. And one of the things that I'll say too is that I think in the past, my tendency would have been to kind of really like wallow and sit in the emotion and really be like, what is this trying to teach me? I need to be with this as long as possible because it's trying to kind of teach me a lesson. But one of the things that I'm learning to do is to recognize the emotion, name it, and then quickly move on from it. Because I think sometimes there's a tendency to be kind of too far on the other end of the spectrum, where we're just so deeply into the emotion that it kind of stops us from moving forward and it kind of keeps us stuck. You know, it's like kind of being in quicksand in some way. And I'm working on this for myself of just recognizing the emotion, naming it, and then just sort of saying, okay, well, what do I need? What is my body telling me?
Okay.
What is my gut telling me? And using that as sort of like my GPS. I love what you said about GPS, using that as like my compass and GPS,
Yes.
kind of point me towards the next thing, rather than maybe flailing and getting kind of a little too swampy with the emotional piece, you know?
Okay. Thank you.
And I think anytime that you can sort of shift from being in your head to being in your body, I think is so important. I think our bodies
I
are
agree.
speaking to us 24/7. I think our bodies are often actually screaming at us and we don't usually listen. So I would, I think just a really simple, this is something that I learned from my therapist a few years ago. She would often say, Vesna, when you're making a decision, ask yourself, is your body telling you yes, or is your body telling you no? And just get quiet and listen.
Okay.
So anytime that we can do that and listen to what our bodies are telling us, I think we will not be making mistakes. I think it's the ego. I think it's the thoughts.
Yes.
I think it's those judgments that sort of lead us astray.
Of course.
But I think if we can just really tune into the wisdom of what our bodies and our hearts are telling us, then we're going to be on the right track.
Absolutely. Thank you. That was great. I really like what you said about, that the value has been placed on intellect. Therefore, we tend
So
to
much.
suppress and really push down the emotional piece, which is very important. But we've learned to suppress that and focus more on thinking through it and what do you understand about it and what does the research say, and making decisions based on that. Very powerful. Thank you.
And I think, in like the kind of in the world of therapy, like up until very recently, there was this idea that your therapist or your coach has to be like a kind of blank slate. You can't have any emotions and can't, and I think one of the things that I talk about when I talk about being like an anti-racist coach and having like a decolonialist kind of perspective is this idea of bringing your humanity into session. Like we are not robots. We are people with feelings. We are people who sometimes have good days and bad days. And we sort of run the gamut of all the feelings and human experiences. And why do we have to kind of pretend to not be that way in session with clients, And I think obviously you have to find like a good middle ground. But I think, I think people respond to that. People respond to this idea that, hey, my coach is actually a person with real feelings and real ideas and struggles, you know? And I think that's what they relate to. And that what makes them feel comfortable to also share and tell a story.
I agree.
And so, like the more humanity and the more authenticity we can bring into these spaces that haven't traditionally been like that, I think we'll just be better off in the long run. And I think it's important. Yeah.
You mentioned something, as a racialized or marginalized, as a woman as well. What I've noticed too, and I wanted to know what your experience has been, but I've noticed that in the world of maybe coaching, I don't see a lot of representation of maybe people of color. And the ironic thing about it is, though, people will relate more. There's so many people that you can connect to and that will relate to you because of what you represent. But I don't see it, and I'm not sure if it's, it's because of the institution and people are just feel like it's not something good to get into, or they feel like they won't connect with a lot of people. I wanted to hear your thoughts on it and maybe ways that we can open up the channels for people to maybe start to get into it or get involved.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is such an important question. And, I want to kind of preface what I'm about to say with also saying, like, this conversation that we're having, two people of color in conversation about these topics feels really disruptive and really important.
Yes.
I think we need to, whenever we can be in community with each other, whenever we can be in dialogue with each other, I think we're kind of disrupting the norms. We're sort of disrupting these systems that have told us that we can't assemble and that we can't share, So I just want to sort of say, just this feels really great and really disruptive in the best way possible. There is this somatic practitioner, their name is Prentice Hemphill, and they say, the world of wellness has often been centered around white women's anxiety and male performance up until very recently. And that resonates with me so deeply, and I think maybe a lot of racialized people haven't been maybe encouraged or haven't necessarily felt like they can take up space in this world because there haven't been a lot of people that look like us who have been doing the work. So I think there just needs to be more people like me coaching, more people like you coaching, more people like us telling our stories. And one of the nice things that I realized during the pandemic is that, you know, after everything that happened in the States, after everything that's happened also in Canada, I think people have been seeking me out as a coach specifically because I have that kind of anti-racist lens. And those are things that matter to me, and those are things that are important to me. So I've had clients when we sort of have our final session together, and I ask them, like, what made you choose me as your coach? They'll say, that piece was important for us, and we wanted to support you, and we wanted to specifically work with you for that reason.
Of course.
And I think in the past, maybe I would have kind of shied away from having like a kind of strong political opinion or saying those things so vocally. But, you know, if 2020 and 2021 have taught me anything, is that it is not a time to stay silent. It is not a time to be quiet. It is a time to speak up. It is a time to disrupt. It is time to change. And that starts with ourselves. And that starts with chipping away at these industries and these spaces that haven't made room for us traditionally, and taking up space, and taking up space with joy, and taking up space with a lot of heart as well. And I think it's so important. And I think, you know, I'm seeing more racialized coaches. Like, it's starting to happen, you know, it's slow going, like a lot of things,
it is happening.
Slowly but surely it's happening, you know, and in an ideal world, like, I'd love to be in practice with a community of other racialized coaches and therapists, and let's take over the world.
That was great. That was absolutely great. So before we start to wrap up here, and again, I want to say I really appreciate you doing this. The responses, your energy, phenomenal, fantastic. The education was great. Thank you so much, Vesna. But did you want to take us away with any final words before we wrap up our session together this afternoon?
Yeah, so, you know, I want to kind of go back to an idea that I sort of said at the beginning is, you know, just commit to daily practices every day that bring you joy. Listen to the whisper in your heart. You know, take time in your day to rest and recover. Life in 2021 is so complex and so ambiguous and so stressful. So just, prioritize yourself, prioritize your joy, prioritize your rest. And, you know, whenever you find yourself like intellectualizing a little too much or being in your head a little too much, if you can, just find ways to kind of drop into your body and drop into the wisdom of your body and your heart. And, you know, I think coaching up until recently has been a field that not a lot of people have understood, not a lot of people have known about. But I would say that, like, now is the perfect time to be working with a coach. Now is a perfect time to be doing the kind of really interesting and inward work of, figuring out what it is that you want, figuring out what you want to do next, figuring out how to deal with, like, the day-to-day stresses of life. And I feel as though coaching is a really wonderful way to do that. So, coaching personally changed my life. And I believe it can change many people's lives. So,
Well said. Thank you, Vesna. I appreciate you. That's Patrick Dankwa and Vesna from Next Up in the Spotlight.